Back, everyone. This is Larry Morris, and this is session 6 of my series on self-publishing on Amazon. And this session is going to cover how to build a paperback cover using a product called Inkscape. I've used several different products, both raster-based and vector graphics-based, to build covers, and this is probably the best one I've run across, and I've been using it for my covers for my books and for covers for clients that I work for, who I build covers for probably now about, I want to say, 7 or 8 years. And when we get to looking at the actual software, we'll talk about some of the ins and outs of it, but I want to start by where you have to start with building a cover for Amazon, and that's getting a template from Amazon. And let's bring this down a little bit so we can get it inside my display area for the video so you can see everything I'm doing. And this is a rather straightforward process that Amazon provides for free. You do not need a publishing account with Amazon to make this work. You can go to their website and use this facility. It's a form that you fill out on their website. And the spot you want to go to is this one. You can pause the video and jot this down and then save it as a link. But that's where you go to generate a template to build a cover on Amazon. And you have to fill out this entire form. And we'll talk a little bit about why some of the things are in this form as we move along. But the first thing you want to pick is whether you're doing a paperback or a hardcover. They do both require a separate independent cover file for publishing them both. You can have the same elements on both covers, the same artwork and the same text, but the cover template itself is larger for a hardcover because of the way the hardcover is produced on Amazon. It's a case laminate cover, and those are traditionally larger than paperback covers. So you have to have a separate template for both, but we're going to pick up paperback, and we will pick, in this case, black and white. The reason this is on here, and keep in mind this is for specifying the color of the interior of the book, and that's important for a cover because the paper that's used, for example, for standard or premium color is a heavier paper than is used for black and white. Therefore, it's thicker, so that makes the spine thicker. So that all relates to things that you have to pay attention to when you build the cover. And the same thing with paper type. Cream paper is a little thicker than white paper. You may not see groundwood paper throughout the entire publishing process. It's on the template, but you may not see it throughout the entire publishing process unless you're part of the beta. It's in beta right now, and I haven't even played with it, so not too sure exactly what it is, but we'll pick white paper. Reading direction, in the United States, everything is always left to right. Measurement units, it's always easier to work in inches than it is in millimeters, at least for me. And then I'm going to pick a trim size, and the one we're going to be working with today is a 6x9. We also need to specify a page count, obviously because that has a bearing on the width of the spine, and that's what most of this stuff does. And then we're going to click on Calculate Dimensions. Now, if you are doing this to provide these measurements to someone who's building this cover for you, and they don't necessarily want a template. They just may want the measurements. That's what these are for. And this is the one to pay attention to, the full cover size. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. But you may just need to pass them these specifications. If not, if you're doing the cover for yourself, or someone else is doing it for you and they want the template, then you need to press the download button, and you will get downloaded an actual template that we'll look at in a second. Now, if you're on a Windows device like I am, this download will appear in your download folder. If you're on a Mac, I apologize, but I have no idea where that download is going to show up. But when you open the file, you'll see three things in it. And let's do an extract first to get them extracted from the zip file. That's what you're going to get downloaded, is a zip file with these three files. The README text simply goes over a little bit about how to do what I'm going to show you, and I mean a very little bit, but I would read it anyway just to familiarize yourself with it. Then you have two different files that look the same except for the file extension. One's a PNG and the other is a PDF. I think Amazon really provides the PDFs just so you can have an external visual representation of the template while you're working. You don't necessarily need to use this PDF. Sometimes it's difficult to use a PDF in a build process because PDFs are always considered end stage documents. So a lot of times attributes that need to stay with an object, like pagination and things like that, don't make it over to a PDF. So I think they only provide that for visual assistance. I've always used the PNG file, and that's what we'll use today. Now I have saved this file in a folder so that we can operate from there. So let's close these, and we'll close. I don't think we're going to need the HTML processing anymore. Let's open that folder, and this is what that PNG file will look like. And notice the processing that you picked. Let me see if I can get my marker stuff to work on this. It's a little bit difficult sometimes, a little bit finicky. It notices we have a 6x9 book, and then it is black and white. It's 250 pages, and it's white paper, and all of that is kind of encapsulated in the name of the file: 6x9, 250 pages, black and white paper. That way you can keep track of what this particular template was used for. They've evolved over the years, and they've gotten better at naming these things for you. So that's what we're going to be working with. And in order to use it, we're going to open it in the vector graphics program that I use, Inkscape. And I'm going to do it a certain way. I'm going to go to that template and right-click on the template, go to Open With, and then I'm going to click on Inkscape Vector Graphics Editor. Now, this process may look a little bit different if you're on Windows 10. This is Windows 11, and as always, Windows likes to change things a little bit. So just make sure you know where this option is. And let's talk about a couple things here as soon as this comes up. The first one that I want to mention is, and again, this is now that it's opened in this product. Let me move this over a little bit. Everybody always asks me, why do you use Inkscape? And I can tell you quickly for two reasons. One is this product allows you, at least in my estimation, and like I said, I've used a lot of different raster-based products and vector graphics-based products over the last 8 or 10 years. And this one far exceeds most of them in terms of two things. Number one, being able to control the objects. It's a lot cleaner and a lot more flexible than a lot of the other tools. And the second one is, since it is a vector graphics program, the text is extremely sharp and clear. And I can show you a sample of what I'm talking about. And let's get the folder back up and pull this sample up. And let's get it within my frame of reference here so you can see it and make it a little bit larger. Now, you may need to make this, if you're looking at this on your phone, this presentation, it's going to be difficult to see this, but you may need to crank up the resolution a little bit to see what I'm talking about. First of all, both of these samples are taken at 400% magnification. Now, it is true, obviously, that when somebody picks up a paperback and looks at the cover, they're not going to go grab a magnifying glass and look at the text on this. But what this nets you, the way this text comes out, is very crisp and very clean text, no matter what size the text is, for headings and things of that nature on the cover of a book. The top example was developed in a Photoshop lookalike product, and this is what happens when you're using a raster-based product, which means you're working with a product that deals with pixel-based photographs, and therefore the text that you create in this product is also pixel-based. And when you're working with something that only has a limited number of pixels, when you make it larger, you can see around the edges, in some cases, the letters are a little fuzzy, and that's because they've been made larger than the pixel base that is present supports. On the other hand, when you're working with, in this bottom example, this is the same text in a vector graphics piece of software, the one I use in this case, and notice how crisp and clean everything looks, and it will look that way no matter what size you make the text for your cover. So if the size is very large on the cover, sometimes it's going to pixelate and look scratchy like this. But if you're using a vector-based product, it's not going to do that. It's going to look exactly like that. So that's the second reason I use Inkscape, is because it handles text exceedingly well. Now, the second point I'll bring up is, why do an open with? Why not just open this software and import the template into the software? The reason is that, and we'll get to all this stuff over here on the right-hand side. Over here, we'll get to all of this when we're ready to start talking about layers and objects, but I need to highlight this or select this template so I can scoot it off a little bit. And let's make this a little smaller so we can see the entire screen. Every product that you work with, whether it's a Photoshop lookalike or a vector graphics product or anything like that, when you open it, there is going to be, by default, a canvas that you're working on, or a working space. And you can control the size of that working space in all of these products. And in this one particular, you get to it by pulling down File and saying Document Preferences. And this is the work where you define the size of that page, or that canvas, as some products call it. It's called different things in different products. but that's what you need to be aware of. And in this case, it's specified in pixels, but we're going to change that to inches. And if these numbers look familiar, 12.82 and 9.25 inches, that's the size of that template that we looked at. That's the overall size of the template. And you can see that on the template itself, 12.8, in this case it's 12.813. They've rounded it up to 12.82 and 9.25. That's important that the canvas that you're working with in the product be exactly the same size as the project itself. And the reason for that is when we're done with this, the very last thing we're going to do is save this as a PDF. Amazon requires that the cover file that you upload be a PDF. And in order for that PDF to be the size that Amazon expects it to be, you have to make sure that that canvas behind all of your work is that size. So that was a long drawn-out explanation to make sure that whatever you do, the resultant PDF for a cover file has to be that. If it's not, Amazon's going to yell at you when you try to upload it. So now let's talk a little bit about the tools that you might see here. And there are two specific areas of tools that I want to mention. One of them is over on the left-hand side, and it's this set of tools here. We're only going to use a couple of them. We're going to use the Select tool, the Rectangle tool, and the Text tool, and we'll touch on the Gradient tool quickly. But there are a lot of others, and I think one of the smartest things you can do if you're going to start using this product is go out to Google and do a search on Inkscape tutorials, and you'll find a lot of them out there, and find one that covers the basics of this product so it touches on everything for you. I would highly recommend you do that. This is a complicated piece of software, but if you look at it from the beginning in terms of how do I do certain things with it, then it becomes easier to work with. So that's what I would recommend. The second part of the tools is this area over here on the right-hand side is called the docking area, and certain things that you need to use in the product are eligible to be docked over here so that you can get to them quickly. And I have about 3 or 4 or 5 things docked over here. I have layers and objects. And then I have fill and stroke, and we'll talk about fill and stroke when we get to it. I have align and distribute, which we probably won't use today. That's in case you have multiple objects on a layer and you want them all aligned in a certain way, like you want the tops of them all aligned or the bottoms or whatever. There's an export function that I use all the time particularly when I want to take an object that I'm working on and export it as a PNG file. And then path properties and effects, which we're not going to get into today. But the point is, this gives you a place to leave these controls where you can get to them quickly. And all of them, for example, layers and objects, all you have to do to get that docked is click on Object in the top row, and the very first entry is Layers and Objects. When you click on that, you have the option to dock it over here if you want to. So one of the things also that you can look at with a YouTube video is do a Google search on Inkscape docking, and you'll get to a video that shows you how to dock all of this stuff on the right-hand side. So in terms of control, you can do a lot with this in terms by just customizing the way the product looks and the way you use it. The bottom layer that I'll mention real quick down here, they have a very simple, straightforward way of applying simple colors. There's a lot of color options in this product that you can pick, but this gives you the basic colors and the basic shades of those colors very quickly, and we'll be using those to a certain extent today. Okay, so the very first thing I do when I import this template is I'm going to, the product creates a layer, which is always the top, and you'll notice this is in a hierarchy, and then within it is an image, which is the one you imported. So I'm going to rename this as template so I can keep track of what this is, and then I'll collapse it a little bit, and then I'm going to lock it, and we'll talk about these options over here, the ones that just popped up in a few minutes. But the first thing I want to talk about is the concept of layers and objects within layers. And this may sound awfully simplistic, but let's bring up a picture that everybody, I'm sure, is used to, particularly everybody my age. When you went to if you went to high school in the 50s, 60s, or 70s, you ran into one of these, and they're still around. Obviously, people still use them. It's called an overhead projector, and the idea is you have sheets of transparent film that you can write things on and put on top of that projector and have it shown up on a screen for the class or for the audience if you're giving a presentation. That's the concept that we're going to be working with when we talk about this product's use of layers and objects within those layers. If you think of a layer as one of those transparencies, and what's on the transparency is an object, then you have the whole concept down pat. And the idea is you want to build up your cover by creating layers of objects. For example, we're going to create a layer for the front cover. We're going to create a layer for the spine and a layer for the back cover. And within each of those layers, there are going to be pieces of text, there's going to be pieces of art, and so forth. The reason you want them segregated, number one, is just for organizational properties, so you can tell where everything is and what everything is, and it's easier to manipulate that way and keep track of it if you put everything categorized in layers. Now, you don't have to. You can, if you want to, in this product, have one layer and you can put all the objects underneath it, but you will lose a lot of control. And some of that I can point out as we go along. So let's close that. So now I have one layer called, let's rename that again, template. Okay, I didn't hit enter the last time. So now I have one layer called template, and it's got one image in it, which is our base template that we're going to use. And notice these three icons over here. They are not only at the layer level, but they also show up at the object level. And quickly, what these three do, the first one, the little square, and I'll open it up, is controlling the opacity of an object, how transparent it is. And when it's defaulted, it's set at 100%, which means it's not transparent at all. And watch what happens to the object as you move this bar down. This object is going to get more and more transparent, and it's eventually going to disappear. That will come in handy as we move forward with this. The second one is the eye is used to control whether this entire layer can be seen or not. If you close the eye, you can't see it. It's still there, obviously, but you can't see it. And we'll show you how that comes in handy later. And the little lock, obviously, will prevent you, if you have the lock locked, will prevent you from selecting this object. If you unlock it, now you can select it, and you'll notice the handles around it. We'll talk about those in a moment. But the reason you may want to lock a layer when you're done with it, you may have a situation where you have a layer or several layers, and each one has multiple objects in it, and some of those objects may overlap one another. And if you need to select a certain object to do something with it, sometimes the software gets confused as to which one you're talking about because they're so close together. So the idea of that lock is you can lock it and it won't get in your way. It's still there, you can see it, and it won't get in your way when you try to select something else. So that's the reason that's there. Now, let's talk about the second layer that I usually build. And by doing that, I'm going to click on this little button up here that says Add Layer. And it's going to pop this up, and I'm going to call it a base color. Now, normally on a paperback, you have, and let's bring up this to give you an example. Whoops, wrong one, or at least wrong. Let's navigate to where I was here. Okay, that's where I belong. There's a couple of things to point out on this. Let's look at a sample cover, one of mine that has been put together, and let me move this down to give you a better view of it again within my area of the recording here. Let's get it sized better. Some of you may be familiar with this book, but one of the things you can do, obviously, with any cover you're designing is if you have a piece of art or a photograph that you want to span the entire cover. And in this case, we're talking about the back cover, and this is the spine and the front cover. I'll show you how to do that. It involves resizing a photo that you bring in and then perhaps cropping it and then moving it to the right position. So that's one option. Sometimes that's very dramatic if you can find something that speaks to what the book is about. Obviously, that's what the cover should do. One of the other options is something like this. Well, let's actually look at the cover itself. That's just part of the cover. The cover itself looks like this. In this particular case, the front cover is the only one that has major art on it that goes edge to edge. The back cover has a couple of pieces of art, like the small piece of clip art here, my photograph, and another piece of clip art that represents my publishing logo. And a lot of text is on the back cover, obviously. That is usually what happens with a book cover, and we'll talk about several things when we look at this stepwise, how this cover is built. So let's take a look, first of all, at the process of putting a base color down, which, again, you may not need if you're going to have a full photograph or art that covers the entire book, back, spine, and front. You won't need a base color. But if you only have art on the front, you're going to need some kind of color on the back of the book. And that's what we're going to do now, is I'll show you how to do that. first thing I'm going to do is click on the rectangle, because I'm going to build a rectangle of color that's going to wind up being on the back of the book. And I'm going to take it out, all the way out to the full spine. These two dashed lines on the spine represent the fold lines where the cover will be folded. So I want to take this back art all the way over to that dashed line. Now, as soon as you build an object like this, in this case a rectangle, you wind up with several handles. The square ones should be obvious. They let you move this and resize it as you need to. The round one may not be obvious, but if you click and hold the round one and drag it, you're going to get rounded corners instead of square corners. Once you're happy with the way that looks, click on the selection tool, which is the arrow that points up and to the left over here. And what that's going to give you is a set of handles around that object. Now, obviously, these handles can be used very similarly to those ones I just mentioned earlier when you first create that. But in order to do anything with this object, it has to be governed by the selection tool that we just clicked on. Now let's pick a better color. Let's make it lighter gray, or maybe that's way too, maybe a light tan color, something like that. Now, one of the things you noticed on that sample cover that I popped up is it was not a solid color like that. It was actually a gradient, where this part of the cover, of the back cover of the spine, was lighter than this side, the left side. So what we're going to do, while it's selected, and notice over here, you can tell it's selected by the fact that this is a darker color of gray, and it's simply called Rectangle 1, is I'm going to click on Fill and Stroke. Fill and Stroke allows you to manipulate the inside color of the object, which is the fill, and the stroke, which is the line around the outside of the object. Let you make the stroke bigger, smaller, or get rid of it completely. So one of the things we're going to do is click on Fill to make sure that's what we're working on. And notice that says it's a flat color, but the one next to it, I'm going to pick Linear Gradient. Now, as soon as I do that, it's going to give you a default gradient where the right-hand side is much lighter than the left-hand side. Now, if you want to control how that looks and how that gradient works, that's where we're going to click on this gradient tool over on the left and show you this very quickly. You'll have two handles on this line, and the only one we're going to talk about today is the one that turns out to be a red dot. When you click on it, click and hold that, and now you can control how much of this gradient appears lighter or darker. And you can even control, by moving it up like this, where the dark and the light meet, and how actually it looks. So that's going to be our gradient for the back cover. You also may want to flip this horizontally, and let's click on the Select tool again to get rid of the gradient control, just to show you how you can manipulate this object. Make sure it's still selected, obviously, then go up to Object and click on Flip Horizontal, and now you have the light on the left and the dark on the right. So you can play with that any way you want to. And don't forget, this product, like Word and most other products nowadays, has an undo tool on the tool line, and if you click on that, it negates the last function you did. So I'll get rid of that horizontal flip by using the undo tool, and I'll click off of this to show you what it's going to look like. Now, part of the problem here with this is it's not just a color. It's a rectangle, and it's got a big line around it. So let's select this again, and we're still in Fill and Stroke. So let's go down to the bottom, to the next line down and click on stroke. And now click on the X and we get rid of that stroke. Notice it just disappeared. So now we don't have a box anymore. Let's go back to layers and objects and click off. Now we just have color. Now, in some cases, we need to be able to, if we have color applied, we need to be able to control what that color looks like so we can see and manipulate things over here very close to the margins. And if you notice, we can't see that right now. So the very next thing we need to do is, with the object selected, click on the opacity button, and tone it down a little bit so you can see this area underneath it, which is the template that we're looking at. Notice how this stuff is stacked now. I have this base color sitting on top of the template, so we needed to lighten this base color a little bit so we could see what was underneath it, the template. So that's the process we're going to use for the entire arrangement of all of this, this particular cover example. Now let's lock that, because we're done with it, essentially. And let's create another layer on top of that called front cover. And notice when a layer is created, it's automatically unlocked. And let's insert a piece of art that we're going to use to demonstrate how to get art in and out and photographs. So pull down File and click on Import, and you get what can be called a normal Windows file frame, where you can move to a different library or a different folder and pick an image. And I think the image we're going to pick is, let's take a look at the names again. I want to pull image.png in, so that is this one. Let's pull that in. Now, the very first thing you notice is that this image is huge. And you can see where the template is back here and the canvas underneath this, all this stuff. So the very first thing you need to do is figure out how to make this image a size that you can work with. I'll show you two different ways to handle changing the size of that photograph or that piece of art, so that, because that's really what this is, it's a piece of art, to make it more manageable. The first one, and this is a little bit more cumbersome, is to go down to the bottom right where the zoom controls are and make this very, very small. And now you can see the entire piece of art, and you can see the canvas underneath it. Now, in order to make something smaller, I mentioned before that there are handles all around it. But in this particular product, in order to make it smaller and maintain the aspect ratio of the art or photo, you need to hold down the Control key and pick one of the corner handles and move it in to make the photograph or art smaller. So I'm going to use those handles. And now it's at least manageable. So now I can crank it back up size-wise and move it. I'm going to use this art for the front cover. So I need to, again, resize it, hold down the Control key, use the handle. Now, I have it covering the front cover, but if you'll notice, it's hanging over the edge quite a bit, because this is the edge of the front cover right here. It's hanging over it quite a bit. So I'm going to have to crop this photo. I'm going to have to move it the way I want it to appear on the cover and then crop it. And in order to move it left and right, all I have to do is just click and hold it and then move it like this. But it's difficult still to see where my edges are and where the template is. So what I'm going to do, and I need to make this a little bit larger to get it down over the edge of the template itself. I'm going to click on the little black square, which again handles the transparency, and I'm going to make it a little bit transparent so I can see where the edges are. Now I can click on this and hold it and move it to the left, because one of the things I wanted to make sure I did was to get this small planet in the frame. I wasn't too concerned about losing maybe a hair of these rings up here, but I wanted the small planet in and most of this planet in the frame. So now I've moved it to where I want it, and now I have to crop it. So in order to crop a piece of art or a photograph, first of all, you have to apply a standard rectangle to what you want to remain after the crop. So I'm going to move this rectangle over that part of the photo and select it. Now once that crop rectangle is in place, now I need to hold down the Shift key and select the photo or the art. Now I have them both selected, and I go to Object, pull down and go to Clip, and say Set Clip. And now that is cropped to match that template that I put over it. And now I can go back into the object's opacity and bring it back up to where it's supposed to be. Now that's the way to position full front cover art for a book cover using this software. Now you can add clip art, like for example, I'm still in the front cover, keep in mind, the front cover layer. Let's import another piece of art. And I believe that's going to be the image1.png, which is this one. And notice we have the same issue now, where that piece of art is quite large, and we're going to have to contain it and bring it down to a level we can use it. Now, to do that, I'm going to show you the second technique for bringing a large piece of art or an image under control so you can manage it better without moving everything around. Once you have an object selected, and you can't tell by looking at the object on the screen, but it is selected because you can see it over here. It's grayed, which means it's selected. Because if we use the eyeball, if we close it, it goes away. So you know you're working on the right object. Okay, that's a tip right there. Now, in order to manipulate it using these controls at the top up here, we have two sets of controls. This first one, an X and a Y coordinate, that controls where the upper left-hand corner of the object is. And notice they are minus numbers. And the reason they're minus numbers is this is the upper left-hand corner that you're referencing on the object is relative to the upper left-hand corner of your canvas. The upper left-hand corner of your canvas is always known as 0, 0, X and Y. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to set these to 0, 0. And now you can see that I can see part of the object better, and you can see the actual dash line and one of the handles for the object. So it did indeed reposition this object to relative 0, 0, which is the upper left-hand corner of the canvas, just by entering 0, 0. The second thing I need to do is to make it smaller. And that's what these next two controls allow you to do. And you have to be careful with them for a couple of reasons. Number one is you have to make sure the aspect ratio is preserved, and you do that by locking that lock right there. If that lock is locked, then when you change the width to something and then change the height, Inkscape may have to modify the width that you initially put in order to maintain the aspect ratio of that object. So that's always the thing to remember, is you want this locked. And I want to work in inches instead of millimeters or pixels or whatever. Now, the cover, remember, is 6 by 9. But this piece of art that I'm working with, if you remember the original cover we looked at, kind of goes down here. So it's not going to be 6 by 9. I don't want it to be 6 by 9. I want it to be kind of maybe 2 by 3, something like that. Let's see what that looks like. If I make the width 2 inches, now see, it's changed it already. Then it's already also updated the height as 2.895 because it's going to keep the aspect ratio intact as long as this lock is on. And that's a pretty good size. So let's click and move that down here. And now I may want to make it a little bit smaller. So again, remember, to maintain the aspect ratio when you mess with a piece of art or a photo, always hold down the control key. And that's not bad right there. I think that's where I'll leave it. So that's the second way you can, when you bring in a piece of art or a photo that becomes huge because of the size of it, how to cut it down to a manageable size. And those are the two different ways. One is you can, again, minimize the working space till you can see the entire object, or you can use this double set of controls up here. The first one is to pull that object up to the left-hand corner so you can deal with it. And then the second set is actually to adjust the size of that object. So now the next thing I wanted to mention, and we haven't looked at yet how to bring in a full-size piece of art. Let's do that quickly, and then we'll look at some text options. Now I'm going to bring in that photograph, that large photograph that I used on that sample I showed you of back, spine, and front, where it overlays the entire cover. And again, show you just again how to manipulate that and how to crop it and how to position it. And then we'll come back to this situation to talk about text and spine and things, back cover and spine and things like that. So let's import another image on top of our front cover. And I believe the image that I need to bring in is this one, XL-31293. And I believe that's this one. And again, we're faced with an extremely large photograph, and I think in this case, I think this actually is a photograph. I'm not sure where it was taken. But the only thing I'm going to do to begin with is get it positioned to 0, 0. So we know what we're working with. That's the edge of it there. And then let's it's already set to inches over here, so uh, let's make the width, since this is a 6 by 9, let's make the width 13 inches. That covers the front cover, the back cover, and the spine with a little bit left over. So let's make that 13 inches. And it'll adjust the height for us automatically. So now it's down to a workable, manageable size. And if you'll notice, it's pretty close because it's even with the left-hand side, and it's just slightly over the right-hand side. And I know it's at the top of the template because remember I had aligned it with 0, 0, which is the upper left-hand corner of the template. So let's make this a little transparent, because one thing I need to do is bring this down to cover the entire cover. Now the only issue I have is how to position it. So I'm going to click and hold and move it to the left, because I think I had, when I originally put this together, I had decided that I wanted this particular stack here right on the edge of the cover, and maybe even to overlap, or the spine, and maybe even overlap the spine a little bit like that. Because what that bought me was kind of a white space up top and a little light space right in here, and that's where I put the text on the back cover. If you'll notice, that general area is where I put the text. So that's really where I wanted things positioned. And so that was relatively easy to do. You import the art. If it's really large, you orient it using these two numbers with the upper left-hand corner of the template. Make sure you change this to inches, lock the aspect ratio, and then set these two numbers, or at least one of them, either the width or the height. And as long as this is locked, Inkscape will adjust the other one to maintain the aspect ratio, and then you can move it around and do whatever you need to. So that's how to handle a very large piece of art for the entire cover. So let's back that out using the undo key, and there it goes. Now we're back to the first example which is typically, I would say in 80–85% of the cases, what you're going to have is gorgeous art on the front of the cover, and you're going to have text on the spine and text on the back, and you may have small pieces of art on the back like that, or that, the clip arts that I use. And you always have to remember to leave this yellow spot here untouched, because if you put art on top of that, Amazon's going to lay the barcode right on top of that and really cause a problem for whatever you've got there. I think they may give you a warning that you have art overlapping that barcode area, but they're not going to stop you from doing that. Okay, now let's talk about text. I want to mention two different kinds of text for you. And the first thing I want to do is look at single line, simple text. For example, what you want for a title, a subtitle, an author name, or something like that. And if you recall, when we looked at this sample, I had the name of the book, the title, and the subtitle up at the top, and then the author name down below. But you can arrange it any way you want to, obviously. And what we're going to do to implement text, we're still on the front cover, and it's still unlocked, if you'll notice. I'm going to select the text tool, which is the big A over here on the left-hand side. Once you select that, you'll notice some things pop up at the top. Uh, the font that you want to use, any attributes like normal, italic, bold, if it's available for that font. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. And the type size. In this case, I have 14 selected. That's usually what I use for the interior of my books. But what I'm going to do for this title is I'm going to set it to maybe 40 and set it to normal. And we'll talk about some of these in a moment. And then I'm going to just click a spot down here. Now that gives you an idea of how the size of the text. If you want to adjust it, you have to adjust it here. Let's pick 36 and then click again, and notice it's smaller now. So let's go back to 40 and click, and I'm going to type in the title, and notice it's not selected yet by the selection tool. We're still in the text tool. So I'm going to use the selection tool to select it, because you have to have it selected so you can move it around. I'm going to move it to about here, and then I'm going to change the color to white, and then click off. Now you notice in the front cover I now have text and 2 images stacked. Now notice what kind of issues you can run into. And by the way, unlike a lot of less efficient pieces of software, once you create something, an object that's in a layer in this piece of software, it is not blended into the background. You can, for instance, click on this again and then still move it around without having any trouble at all, just like you can click on that and move it around. So you don't lose that capability in this software. But let's look at the notion of how these are arranged here. Let's move this on top of that. And notice the reason it looks like this is because the text here is above this image in this list. If I click on the text and hold it and move it down to underneath that layer, moved it too far. Let's move it up one more. Now notice what happened. I have this one on top and this one underneath it, and it's been hidden. Part of it's been hidden. That's the power of overlapping these. And if you'll notice, you can actually see in this particular case, the way this piece of vector art is, you can actually see some of the words inside some of the spaces of this particular piece of art. So keep that in mind. If you have a piece of art that has spaces in it, you can put something behind it and it will actually show through the way you would think it would, just like it would, again, if you were using an overhead projector with pieces of transparency stacked on top of one another. So let's move this back up. And the safest way to do it is to highlight it and then use these arrow keys to move it one layer at a time. So I'm going to move it up one, and now it's on top again, so I'll move it back over here where it belonged. That's the easy way to do straight, simple text. You can also, at the end of this, if you triple click in here, you will wind up back on the text tool again over here on the left. And you can move the cursor to the end of that and actually hit the return key, and it will start to, I'm not sure why it went all the way down there, but you can actually make more than one line of text. If you want more than one line of text that's independently controlled, then get in the text tool and drop this down a little bit to, say, 24. Well, I don't want to drop that one down. Let's put that back up to 40. I want to click off of that and then drop this down to about 24 and click again. And now I have a subtitle. I'll select it and move it where I want it. So you can create lines of text very easily for title, subtitle, author name. And the way to also get them on the spine, there's an easy way to do it. And first of all, and sometimes when you, depending on which options you have selected, and I have the text option set up in my preferences to not go 100% on transparency. So let's move these up to 100%. They're going to be a lot clearer, a lot whiter. You could use that term. So that's, and let's move this one up. Okay, they're both up now. Now let's lock the front cover and create another layer called a spine. And the first thing I'm going to do is unlock this quickly so I can click on this and right click on it and say duplicate. And then I can move the duplicate over here. And now let's lock that again, the front cover. Now notice you can't see it now because it's white, so I'm going to make it black. Well, let's get, well, the first thing I have to do, this is the text I'm working with, which is that one I duplicated. I need to move it up to this layer because it got created in the front cover. That's where I duplicated it. So I'm going to click on that and say move to layer to get it up to the spine. And now I can lock the front cover and get into that text and actually make it darker. Now the spine is not nearly wide enough to handle that size. So let's triple click it, cut this down to about 20, maybe a little bit larger than that. Let's make it 24. That looks a little bit better. Select it again. Do one more click on it and you'll notice you get the circular handles, the curved ones, that let you curve it like that and then move it to the spine. So all I did was create a new layer. I duplicated that text and then moved it to this layer and then twirled it around so it was standing straight up and down, and then I moved it to the spine. You can do the same thing with the author name if you had the author name on the front cover. Now, the last piece of text control I'll show you is what you typically do on the back cover. Again, you can add clip art all over the back cover, however you want to arrange it. But in order to get a block of text that you can manipulate easier, you need to get into the text tool, and we'll talk about some of these other options over here. So let's bring this back down to 14 point probably. Again, Times New Roman. And let's go to the sample text I have to use for this. I'm only going to use some of it. I'm not going to use all of it. I'm going to copy it up to about here. And then let's close that and minimize that. And the first thing I have to do is get the text into the frame. And I'm going to do that while I'm on the text tool by clicking here and saying paste, which is the one that looks like a little jar of paste. Now the text has been brought in, and notice it's just in a long, long line. So the next thing I'm going to do is pick the rectangle tool, and I'm going to build a rectangle that looks like that, and select it. And let's make it white. and then hold down the Shift key and select the text. And now I have both of these objects selected. Pull down text and say flow into frame. Now, these are the two objects that I've just created. One is the text that I copied in, and the other is the rectangle that I put it in. And notice they're both in the layer called spine, which is okay. I mean, I can create a layer called back cover and move these there, which I really would if I were doing this for real. So keep in mind which layer you're in all the time. And the reason you can't see the text here is because the rectangle's on top of the text. So the first thing we need to do is reverse the order of these two. So I'm going to pick the rectangle and move it down so that the text is on top. Now you can actually see the text. But notice it's a little bit wonky. So I'm going to click in here, use the text tool, get into this text. And this is the first part of the text tools I'll introduce you to, this one. And the reason it's two A's on top of each other is to remind you that what this controls is the amount of space between every line. So we're going to put this about 15 and see what happens. That's better, but not quite right. Let's make it 18. That's still better. So you can change that length relatively easily just by changing that number. And then you also have all kinds of spacing here for spacing different types of spacing between characters, between words, and all kinds of controls. But the major one that people usually want to work with is this pull down that lets you specify left justified, right justified, centered, that's centered, right justified, or fully justified, which looks like that, which is typically what people want. Most people don't want a ragged edge on either left or right. And then the next thing you need to do is leave this text as black and let's highlight it all. And now you can pull down bold and make it a little bit more noticeable. And let's get into the rectangle, which is the rectangle around it, and get into fill and stroke, and get to fill. And we don't need a fill. We want it to be transparent, so we can get rid of that. And now get to the stroke, and we don't need a stroke either. We just want the rectangle there to hold that text. Now get back to objects. And now we can lock the spine. And again, if we wanted to, we could create a layer for back cover and move these two objects, the rectangle and the text, to that layer. And now let's go back into the base color that we worked with earlier. Click on that opacity and move that all the way up. And let's get rid of the template by closing that eye on the template. And that's the beginning of the cover. And let's get the text moved back up. We didn't do that all the way. And let's get rid of the rectangle so it kind of hides a little bit. And that's the beginning of not a bad cover. And next session, session 7, we will talk about the files you need to create and what to upload and how to upload it to publish a book. So thanks for listening. Okay, one more thing I wanted to show you before I close this particular session is what what you need to do when you have the cover done. And let's bring up a full cover that is really the result of some of the partials that we've been playing with our test cover. And let's move this back into the frame again. This is that same cover that we have been fiddling with. Let me get this over here so you can see the full cover. And you notice that one of the things that happened during the creation of this is that this art, this front cover art, is really over the boundaries. You can see the line here of the template, and sometimes that's a good thing to do. That's important because that gives you the confidence that because the trim edge is where they cut right here. So that means you're not going to have any white space around that. So sometimes that's not a bad idea, is to move that art or that photograph over the edge just a hair. But two of the things I wanted to bring up quickly. One is that notice all the layering that I've done with this. I even have things isolated like the quote and the description of the book and the back art, which is that little guy, and the back title. So I have a lot more layers in some cases than you might ordinarily have. But that's okay. The more you have, the better control you're going to have for everything. For example, if you wanted to look at just the front and the back cover without the spine in the way, use that little eye to close it and the spine's gone. Bring it back. So you can control exactly what you're looking at and how using that little eyeball. Now, when you're done, the first thing you need to do when you're completely done with it is pay attention to, at the top of the screen, you will notice that's the name of the cover, the file that we're working with. But notice it has a little asterisk in front of it. That means it hasn't been saved yet. So the very first thing you need to do when you're done with the project is press this button here that will save the file. And that means that now you have this file with an SVG suffix that you can go back out to and bring back up, and all of these layers are available to continue development or move things around. Now, once you've preserved that file, now you need to create the PDF that you need to upload. Pull down the File tab and go to Save As. And when you get the Save As button up, go to the Save As type and pull down, and you want to pick Portable Document Format. That's what PDF stands for. You want to pick PDF and say Save. Well, you may want to move where you're saving it to, obviously, and then say Save. Now, what that's going to do is Inkscape's going to pop up this box that lets you pick several things, and I'm going to give you the best options to use. One is you want to rasterize filter effects, you want to embed fonts, and you want to compensate for rounding. Now, you can go out and read about all of these and find out why I'm recommending these, but that would take way too long in this video. But you can look these up on Inkscape's tutorials and find that out. And the second thing you need to set is the DPI, dots per inch, that you're going to save it as. The standard is 300. You can save it at something denser, but all that is going to mean is that it's going to make the file bigger. So I would recommend 300. And then simply click on OK, and it'll save as a PDF. Now notice this didn't go away. What you now have up here is a PDF version of this file. You've already saved it. So when you close this, whether you close it without saving it and you have to be cautious not to save it as an SVG because you don't want to destroy the SVG that you have already by overlaying it with a PDF. So the best option is to close without saving. And now you have the original SVG file you have, and you have a PDF that looks like this. So that really is the last thing you need to do as you create your cover. Thanks again.